Hey, Anchor Community, Pastor Bryan here, and happy Father's Day to those of us who are fathers of one variety or another. My hope for you is that you feel loved and supported by your family on this special day. And we're going to be talking about fatherhood as well as concluding our teaching series, Unlikely, where we're looking at the life of David. And as I was preparing this message, I thought about my journey of fatherhood, which began almost 11 years ago. There in the hospital in Ellensburg, Washington, my daughter Zoe was born. And I remember as we walked out, finishing our time there in the hospital, I had this, car carrier with this vulnerable girl, seat belted in there. And I remember leaving the doors of the hospital, entering back into the city, headed towards our car. And I remember this weird feeling that almost feels visceral where nobody checked to see if I had a father license. Nobody checked to see if we had some type of certification signaling that we had went through a class, that we are official fathers. That's kind of the journey of fatherhood. You just step into it and now you are a dad. And certainly this is for mothers as well. But I remember this experience, as I said, viscerally. The journey of fatherhood is funny, right? Because moms have this embodied experience of being a mom and this journey of birthing their child. But meanwhile, dads are watching at some level of distance. And all of a sudden we have this kiddo in our hands, and we are baffled and amazed and in love, but filled with so many questions. A journey of fatherhood. I remember with my own dad learning how to use a knife. And this is for some reason, one of those memories of being young and my dad teaching me something that I still hold with me today. He says, you always cut away from yourself. It sounds so intuitive. It sounds like something that, why wouldn't I think of that naturally? But I needed a father to tell me that. Studies have pointed to the fact that dads are uniquely positioned to help their children with more risky activity because they allow for more freedom with the child to explore and to press the boundaries. Now, you might say this is just culturally conditioned, that dads do this, or you might say that it's essential to manhood or fatherhood that they allow more freedom for their children to test the boundaries. But the psychologists and the studies say that because this is the situation, whether it's essential to fathers and men or just culturally conditioned, it's because this is the reality. Fathers are more able to teach their children how to swim or to use a knife. I remember some of those moments with my dad. But there's this other side to fatherhood that we have to name that's part of this complex reality of fatherhood, where if you ever step into a counseling office, one of the first questions is, tell me about your father, right? And the principle is pretty easy to understand. High levels of intimacy with high levels of proximity and high levels of authority always leaves a wound. It always leaves a mark, small or large, because every person is fragile and fallen. So this starts to color in this other side of fatherhood, where not only is it something talked about in the counseling office and the role of a father, certainly a mother as well, but the role of a father. But when we're watching shows, just relaxing, watching some Netflix, the examples of fatherhood are usually not helpful. The cultural image of a father of Homer Simpson or Phil Dunphy as these kind of dad dunces that don't exist to offer strength and protection and intimacy and care for their kids, but really are just the object of joke after joke, are examples put up of what a father is, further complicating the image of father. Many of us grow up without a dad in the picture, again, complicating the image of father. So we're left with this picture, this tension, you could say, of fatherhood, where dads are the ones uniquely positioned to help us at critical learning moments in our early and adolescent development. They're the ones who oftentimes provide those lessons, but at the same time, there's pain and complication and sorting out when it comes to the images placed up of what a father is and our own experiences of them. So we're going to be talking about fatherhood and David's journey as his heart of a father that shows up at a painful point of his life. And this message is really not just for fathers. It's for all of us. It's for spiritual dads who have spent considerable time walking with a spiritual daughter or a spiritual son they've prayed with and cried with and talked with and been available for, been present with. This teaching is for biological dads who are maybe great dads or trying to figure out what it looks like to be a great dad, or feeling like there's some gaps between where they would want to be and where they are with relation to them being a dad. It's for you as well. It's for young men looking towards that potential fatherhood down the line. And what does it look like to grow in the areas of fatherhood and develop the heart of a father? And it's for women looking for the marks of what a good dad would look like. Still, while they're maybe not yet a dad, but looking like, does this man have the marks of a good father, even though they might not be a father yet? And it's for wives and moms looking to love their husbands well towards fatherhood, helping them, cheering them on towards some of these attributes. Well, this is interesting because we've been talking about David as this unlikely king. Today we're talking about him as an unlikely good father. We'll see that he has the heart of a good father, but it's unlikely. In fact, at some critical moments in David's own children's life, he messes up sizably and causes extreme amounts of challenge and pain in his family. And probably the person who is most affected is his son Absalom. Absalom is hurt by some of David's actions, as David is a father, Absalom his son. And what we see as the story develops in 2 Samuel is that this bitterness in Absalom begins to bloom with his own conspiracy he concocts at the expense of his father. You see, Absalom hangs out at the city gates of Jerusalem and talks to people as they come in and says things like this: wouldn't it be great if you had somebody to truly represent you? Somebody that really knew your interests? Somebody that was able to cut taxes and raise Social Security and provide care that you needed, just like you need, in the way that you need it. I can do that. And after he, throughout that story in 2 Samuel 15 and 16, talks with people over and over again at the city gates, knowing that his eventual plan is to create enough favor so that he is able to rival his dad and take over the role of king. And he eventually does it, which becomes this painful moment between David and his son Absalom, but more even the nation of Israel. As Israel is divided and broken, and David flees and runs away to protect himself because his son has become a threat to him. And there in this spot, as tension and battle between the two camps mounts, eventually Absalom dies. Even though David sends messages that he needs to be protected, to don't harm him, protect him, even though he's the greatest threat to me, he's still my son. And Absalom dies in battle. What we see is in this context is that David, as a father, has a love that's bigger than a role. 2 Samuel 18:33 says, as David hears about the death of his son, he says, the king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. And as he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son, Absalom. If only I had died instead of you, Absalom, my son, my son. In those verses, or in that verse, we hear grief just pouring out. Poems have been written about that one verse. A book has been by Faulkner, one of America's greatest storytellers, has been written about that one verse. The pain of a father gushing out as he hears about his son that is a rival, but has now passed away as his own warriors have ignored David, the king's call to protect him. He's filled with grief. It's interesting that at this critical juncture of David's life and leadership, he identifies more as a father than a king. David occupies these two roles right now. National leadership, where there is a threat to his national leadership and to the nation, and he needs to squash that threat so that threat doesn't further divide, challenge, and bring pain to the nation. He has a responsibility as a king, but then he has this heart of a father. And both of these roles are in contest. They're in competition. The Hebrew scholar Robert Alter talks about when you look at this particular story in chapter 18, it continually refers to David, not as David, but as king. Almost to say, pushing his role like to the forefront of the narrative. He's a king, he's a king, he's a king. And when people talk to him, they use the word king. They don't use the word David. They intentionally use the word king. But what we see in David's interactions is that he's a dad. And so the narrative tension in 2 Samuel is showing us this pain and this grinding tension between his role as a king and his heart of a father that really is a love bigger than his role. I remember, obviously not being in a situation like David, but finding myself in tension where I have a role, but I'm also a father. And many of us maybe have felt this tension between needs and the things that are being asked of us in our vocation, in our job, and then the life in the home and the questions, Dad, when are you coming home? I remember feeling some of these, and I remember my friend telling me, Bryan, when they hired me to the role that I'm currently at, and he's as a ministry role in another city, he said, when I was being interviewed, I said, my goal here is to be a decent leader and a really great husband and dad. And if you don't want to hire me because my primary goals are to be a really great husband and dad, then you probably need to find somebody else, because I'll always be a good and adequate leader, because that will always be at the expense of who I am to my kids and my wife. That stuck with me because it sounds counterintuitive to how the interview process will go. If you read any number of blogs, that is surely not going to be on the list of things to say in an interview. But what he was understanding is that the heart of a father the love of a father is bigger than a role. It goes beyond a role. And this is oftentimes the trapping and challenge that we find ourselves in, primarily as dads, more so than moms, because still dads outnumber women in the workplace. And so we find ourselves in this place where we have these competing interests. And the father's love is greater than a role. Before Candace and I moved to Tacoma, I remember, she said it was one of these heart-to-heart moments where we were praying and asking God about what it would look like to plant a church. And, my wife is introverted and I'm extroverted to a fault. And I remember she said, and this is something we've revisited many times, she said, Bryan, I think we can do this. And I heard, great, we're on the same page, we're dialed. And she said, I think we can do this if. And some of you have heard this story. She said, we can plant a church if we have a regular date night, You take a Sabbath every week. We take a Sabbath every week. And every Friday night is family night. Every Friday night, you're a dad. You're not chasing texts down, not trying to corral and convince and woo and win and plan and strategize. No, you're just a dad with his kids. I can tell you that the most beautiful moments in the last 4 years of being on this church planting adventure, though many of them have been with the church planting journey, the most beautiful moments have been on the couch on those Friday nights where we're eating pizza and watching a movie. And I look over and my son or my daughter is laughing. Or we're sitting around a table and we're just talking about what came up from the day. And we're able to pick away at no, everything was fine until we get to the something was painful or something was awesome. It's those moments that are the most beautiful. You know, there's this non-Christian think tank, the Greater Good Center at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, and they were in a blog post about fatherhood. They said that as children get older, roles become more clearly defined. Many men accept the cultural script that their children will be closer to their mothers and they will become distant. And the result is that dads stay the course, confining themselves to a box with sturdy walls and no exit. It's almost as if you trace a line from the place where the birth happens, where the mom is intimately involved in the birthing process, and the dad is standing a few feet away, trying to figure out how to love and care for and coach his wife who's giving birth to this baby. It's almost as if you trace a line from that point. The line moves towards intimacy, typically with the mom and the children, and away from intimacy from the dad and the children. Now, this is not every case. We would hope that for followers of Jesus, it's certainly not the case. But this is what the Berkeley Center is saying, is that men don't increasingly know how to interact with their kids, so they confine themselves to their role in the workplace, to the limits and the cultural scripts that are given to them. We see David at this critical juncture in pain and challenge with poignancy, pushing past the fact that he's a king, disregarding the fact that he has national responsibilities, and only paying attention in the midst of all these other people crying for attention, only paying attention to his son has perished. This is the love of a father which goes bigger than a role. We see, though, it's not just bigger than a role. The love of a father is bigger than pain. David could have returned blow for blow with his son, but he refrained from seeing him like an enemy and instead saw him as a son, even through his own pain. Many times through the David and Absalom story, David says, and it's interesting, he doesn't say son, but he goes, tell me what of the boy Absalom? What of the son? What of the boy Absalom? And it's repeated many times. And you could actually, one translator translates it as lad. There's this sense of keen interest and intimate relationship with this boy who has become an enemy, but in the father's eyes, he is still a lad. He's still his boy. And these questions of, tell me of the boy. What of the boy Absalom? As he's asking his advisors, as he's asking his people that have an inside scoop on what's happening in the courts of Absalom, they smell of a father that doesn't see pain as the primary emotion, but doesn't keep his love isn't prevented by the pain, rather, but it goes past. It's bigger than the pain. Again, this is on a grand scale. It's not something that all of us can relate to in the particular exact details of the story, but the principle is still there. Is that a father's love is love that is greater than pain. Because a lot of the journey of a father is one of pain. There's the pain of the passing seasons, of grieving the changes in our kiddo's life. My son recently, after his 8th birthday, told me as we were walking to school for drop-off, he said, "Dad, I'm 8. We don't hold hands anymore." And there was something in me that was like, oh, what happened? As I started looking at this boy that I remember who was born, 8 years ago, but now is slowly becoming an adolescent, a young man, as his shirts that he could wear even a year ago now go up to his tummy, as the Google Photos app tells me how crazy and bucktooth he looked like almost 2 years ago. And now we're walking to school and he's saying, "Dad, we don't hold hands anymore." He's telling me of crushes he has. And what I'm seeing is that there's these changing seasons. There's these passing seasons. In fact, comically, recently, our daughter gave Candace, my wife, a coupon that said, "You can hold my hand if you use this coupon." It was a Mother's Day present. But these passing seasons are part of fatherhood. And oftentimes we don't allow ourselves to grieve that passing season. And so our love for the child who's on the other side of that season isn't reached by our love because we haven't grieved it. But a love that goes past pain is a love that grieves the passing of a season and meets the child, the son, the daughter on the other side of the season, and allows them to be that kiddo after transitioning from one age to another age. But this is like part of the fatherhood journey is simply grieving and the pain of seeing your kid grow. And with that grieving, there's obviously celebration, but there's pain there. And we have to grieve it so our love can meet them on the other side of the season, on the other side of the transition. But there's more pain that is less celebration. There's the feeling of when your kid comes in through the door and you can tell they're heartbroken or they're wearing something incredibly heavy and they don't even have the words for it. And there's this gap between their experience and your ability to care for them as much as you try. "Hey, how are you? What's going on?" And it's only and walking up the stairs. And there's this real pain there in some of those moments where we don't have the words to care and they don't have the words to express. And so what happens is that the heart of a father has a love that goes past pain and is able to just simply be present, is able to be available at the request of the kid, and it finds time to sit down at the right time where the child might start to have some of the words. But in the gap there, especially a father that's wanting to lean in and not knowing how to, sometimes feels that pain. And sometimes at that point, the father kind of like offloads. "Well, I tried. I'm gonna just let them do their thing over there because I tried and I'm hurt because they didn't engage when I reached out. So I'm gonna allow them to feel my disengagement because of how I felt their disengagement." That is not the way of the heart of the Father. The heart of the Father's love is bigger than pain. So even if the child doesn't want to or doesn't have the words to, there's a desire to press in patiently with presence. Because the love of a father is greater than pain. It's the mark of David, where David is reaching for his son, even as his son is avoiding him, which is the next element of pain. It's sometimes where it's not the unexplained tension, but it's the understood tension where someone hasn't said sorry yet. And you know that you're entitled to an apology. But there's this elapsed time where you might feel anger, but even pressed underneath that anger, because anger is always a secondary emotion. It's not a primary emotion. So underneath that anger is just really pain. And it's important to name that. Because if we don't name that, the anger will be misdirected. It will take control. But if we name that there's pain there that's causing the anger, as we're waiting for an apology, after maybe we've been hurt, then we're able to have a love that goes past the pain. Because the very reason for the pain in the first place is because of the love that we have. Why would you not feel love? Or why would you feel pain if there wasn't love there at the root? This is this picture that we see a glimpse of in David's story with Absalom that expresses really the heart of the Father and is echoed in Paul's writing to the Corinthians, the oft quoted passage that is less crochet for from your grandma to you on your wedding day, but really more like rebuke to the Corinthians who are misunderstanding what love is. And so 1 Corinthians 13:4-7 says, "Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it's not proud, it does not dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects. It always trusts, always hopes, and it always perseveres." You could describe the love of the Father towards his kids, that it goes past the pain. It's not just a love that's bigger than a role or bigger than pain, but it's a love that's bigger than success. After David hears about his son dying, he's grieving. Oh, Absalom. After that moment, his counselor, his military advisor, Joab, comes up to him and he says this, chastising David. He says, "You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see that you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Now, go out and encourage your men." In the midst of his military victory, David can only think of his lost son. And this angers his military advisor, Joab. "Don't you know you're the king? Get your act together. Your son hated you. Why are you caring about him? We're all here. He's not. Let's move past it." He ends this passage, this passage continues as he says, "No, go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord, if you don't go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come on you from your youth until now," Joab says to the king. And the response from the king, from the father, is, "So the king got up and took his seat in the gateway." What is David doing there? He's not going to the men. He's collapsing under the pain of his lost son. Fulkelman, a scholar, Hebrew scholar, says it calls up the image of a man beaten to a pulp who can barely stand and does only the minimum requested or expected of him. You get the image. It feels like a movie scene where after being upbraided and just yelled at by your closest advisor, you slump down, your shoulders drooping, your head down, not knowing what to do. This is grief. And it's important to note that it comes in the greater picture of military success. David would be reinstated as king. All would be right with the nation, but at the expense of his son. And David can't see the fact that there is a military victory. There's a national reinstatement of him being the royal king, him being the anointed one. All he can see is his son's not there. And it articulates reality. There is this deceptive story articulated, in the phrase, "He who dies with the most toys wins." Now, I don't know of anyone who would agree with that statement. I don't know why it's become popular. I don't know of a father who actually, or a mother, or anyone who abides by that maxim, "He who dies with the most toys wins." I don't know anyone. But still, even though I don't know anyone who would say, "Yep, that's my script in life," I see many people still living as if it was true. I still feel the tension, if I was honest, within me. The problem research and common experience show is that it just agrees with David that you can have all the success in the world, rather. You can have all the success in the world. If it comes at the expense of your family, the story you're in is a tragedy. The reporter Paul Sullivan for the New York Times summarized a study looking at this with these words, and he said, affluent Americans ages 25 to 65 were asked a series of questions about their attitudes towards wealth. About half of all respondents said the sacrifices they had made to accumulate such wealth meant that they had spent less time with friends and family. That regret rose to nearly 2/3 for people at the higher end of the wealth range in the study. And more than half of business owners felt it too, outpacing people who had accumulated the wealth by working for someone else. The proof is there, is that you cannot have success at the end of days, at the top of the mountain, unless your family's there too. Success doesn't happen at the expense of family. And it's important to note that this affects mothers, it affects moms, it affects women, but it affects fathers disproportionately. And we could have arguments or conversations about if that's fair or what have you, but it affects fathers disproportionately, as fathers are predominantly those in the workforce. So it's fathers that feel this tension if they're living according to the script of "he who dies with the most toys wins," or he who at the end of his days has his kiddos around him, praying for him, wins. So I don't know about you, but hearing these descriptions of the love of a father, and it can feel like, okay, what do I do? How do I take a step towards having this heart of a father love that goes past and beyond? It's bigger than a role. It's bigger than pain. It's bigger than success. Some things we might consider doing is embrace true fatherhood. If you're a dad listening to this, watching this right now, it might mean that you embrace true fatherhood, the picture seen in the glimpse of David here. If the role has been a competition for your role as a father, if your vocation, your job has been a competition and is beating out your role as a dad, it's time to think, what does true fatherhood look like? How do I be an adequate employee and an awesome dad? It might mean that you think about what it looks like to not have pain send us away from intimacy with our kiddos, but to look underneath the pain and underneath the anger and see the beating heart of love there, and let that be the guide towards our kids. It might mean that we just reassign and requalify success and just describe success only in the terms of being with our kids and being with our spouse and letting the growth of love be the definition of success there. It might mean that we, if we're fathers or not fathers, forgive our own fathers. If we're looking at this description of fatherhood expressed in this teaching, you might find yourself being in a situation where that is not what I experienced. And you might feel anger or pain or sadness at that. But as Desmond Tutu, the leader and church leader in South Africa, said, there is no future without forgiveness. And so the path forward, even in that challenging moment, is to begin to forgive your own father. And it's there that you'll find your way forward. You might allow yourself to be reparented by spiritual fathers. At Anchor, we believe that growth always happens in relationship. We need solitude. We need silence. We need to be away sometimes from community, but growth really only happens in a greater context of relationship. And some of my most important relationships are people that have been spiritual fathers to me. People that have older men that have put their arm around me and prayed for me, who've told me things about myself that I kind of secretly guessed, gifts I had, fears I had, but hadn't never expressed. The best way to find a spiritual father is to join one of the groups or to sign up for one of the Connect events here at Anchor. We're in a season where we're coming out of this weird last season into a new season where relationships and connection are easy and they're safe. And I want to encourage you to allow yourself to take a step towards relationship so that you might be reparented by the community that gathers around Jesus. And last, accept the intimate relationship of the Heavenly Father. In the Old Testament, it does not refer to God as Father much, but the second Jesus comes on the scene, all of a sudden, he's always referring to God as Father. He's giving us the invitation to know him as he knows him. When he says, pray in this way, Heavenly Father, your kingdom come. He's inviting you to know God as Father, as loving parent. And oftentimes we like relating to God as a concept, omniscient, omnipresent, omni-whatever. But God is inviting you to something even more than that. He's inviting you to a type of prayer life, to a type of relationship where you know that you're loved. Where you know that God's love goes bigger than his role. Where God's love goes bigger than his pain you might cause. It goes beyond and past his idea of success. God's idea of success is when a sinner repents and knows the love of the Father expressed in the person of Jesus. That's his definition of success. The ultimate way forward with this in closing is just to know that love. To know the love that's expressed most clearly in the person of Jesus, who left his role as a second member of the Trinity, as though being still that second member of the Trinity, left the perfect communion to be born in a manger, fully God, but also fully man. He left that role because his love was bigger than our role. And his love was bigger than pain, as he endured extreme pain for you, because his love was bigger than pain. And his love was bigger than success. He endured the perceived defeat of the cross because his love was bigger than worldly success. Success was not imaginable without relationship. When you know that that love is aimed at you, you can move forward towards embracing the heart of a father.